welcome to Season 2 of the NGO Whisperer Show. My name is Carolyne Opinde. I am the founder of the NGO Whisperer. We are a consulting business that helps nonprofits raise funds so they can successfully impact people's lives. Today, joining us from Nairobi, Kenya is Charles Warria. Charles is a monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning specialist working in the international development sector with a focus on nonprofits in Africa. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
It's such an honor to have you. Please tell us, who are you? What do you do, and what are some of the exciting projects you have been working on, focusing on the work that you do right now in monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning?
Thank you. I'm a development practitioner with a background in development economics. I work a lot in monitoring, learning, and evaluation, seeing how different interventions can utilize various data and learning from the interventions to improve on practice, to document what's changing, what's improving, not just in the livelihoods of the different kinds of people, but also in how market systems are evolving and presenting opportunities for countries to develop because of these kinds of interventions. I've been at it for a couple of years. This is almost I'm clocking my 20th year in this practice. It's been super interesting. I've worked at different levels with communities directly, working with the household empowerment, a transformation. Moving from that, I've worked in a donor agency, again, building capacity of local organizations to be able to effectively monitor and report on the results of their interventions, but also to celebrate the changes that they're seeing in the target groups that they work with. I have worked in consultancy, again, providing technical support as a subject matter expert to different kinds of clients, governments, private sector companies, NGOs, again, on looking at performance measurement. And how do you best engage in performance measurement in a manner that you can track and share impact that matters to your audiences, to your funders, to your supporters, and even to yourself. So it's been an exciting process for me, right from working across different sectors. I've started in the HIV sector.
And that's exactly where we worked together, and that's where I met you for the first time over 15 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So working with young people on behavior change, on HIVS programs, and the interest of tracking whether behavior change does really take place, among young people, and a curiosity around it really, back in the days, there was this mantra of ABC: abstain, be faithful, or use a condom, but there was curiosity in terms of which one of those works most effectively for young people. And so delving into research on factors that drive behavior change among people, young people especially, and then moving from that to household patient support, home-based care for HIV patients, and just tracking what we used to call back then the patient outcome scale. How do you know when the health of patients are improving, both at the household level, but also when they go for clinics and all. So just tracking that trajectory of health improvement. And of course, I moved from there, and I went into projects that supported livelihoods, income generation at household level. Some of the most interesting, like distributing goats to households, and seeing how households can utilize 2 goats to turn around their economic and social well-being, and then of course moving from there to much bigger programs and on an international scale at looking at innovations and how innovations can improve socioeconomic outcomes for poor households, and that kind of thing. And then lately I found myself in market systems, again, looking at taking things to scale. How can markets work to the benefit of poor people, so supporting market actors, looking at what are the processes of market transformation and crowding in, and where is the space for government and private sector actors and industry players to come together and cause this systemic change that markets need to be the driver to poverty alleviation in this part of the world. So it's been super interesting.
When you say this part of the world, you're referring to East Africa, is that correct?
East Africa and of course Sub-Saharan Africa.
Sub-Saharan Africa. So the project that you're working with right now, looking at the markets, working with the private sector, government, and the non-profit sector, covers the entire Sub-Saharan Africa, right?
There's been aspects of it. So I've sort of moved in between spaces. There were times that I worked in projects that covered 26 countries in Africa. I moved to projects that covered Southern and Eastern Africa. And now the project I'm working on right now is just a Kenyan-based project that's looking at how then do you consolidate what you have at a country level, but planning internationally. So it's thinking globally, acting locally.
Wonderful.
Value chains are global. So how do you integrate global value chains to be meaningful for local value chains, and improve on market outcomes?
Wonderful. That brings us to the topic for today, which is effective ways of measuring impact without breaking the bank. When we talk about impact, so many people confuse impact and outcomes. Now,
absolutely,
knowing, having that knowledge and background in the nonprofit sector, I know that, you know that, but many people still struggle with differentiating between impact and outcomes. And I've met so many people saying that they are making an impact when what they did was not even an outcome. They just conducted training and they had a certain number of people show up for a workshop that was conducted once in a year, and they call themselves impactors, or they call themselves changing lives or impacting lives of people. Today, we want to set the record straight. So tell us, what is the difference? And I'll take you even back to outputs. So what is the difference between outputs, outcomes, and impact?
Thank you, Caroline. There are numerous ways to define and look at the different trajectories of results, coming from outputs to outcomes to impact. And sometimes people get caught up in the semantics and the definition, and then they miss the whole thing, which is simply a trajectory. So for example, if you start from the basic M&E understanding of results, there are short-term results, there are medium-term results, and there are long-term results. The short-term results are taken as your outputs. They are your immediate, and you have some control over when and how and in whom they can happen. And then you have your medium-term results. And the medium-term results is they begin to change into now certain behavior changes. And you begin to lose control because your medium-term results are more often than not within your control. They are within certain actors that you're working with. And then the long-term results become the impact, which is a bit far removed from you directly, but you still have them in your interest. I'll give an example. So for example, if you're working with outcome mapping, there are things where we categorize them into three spheres. This is your sphere of control, and the sphere of control is where you can put your resources directly and cause change to happen. So if you have money to train people, you have control in terms of the number of people that can be trained, and you can say, out of this project, we're going to ensure that we train, say, 2,000 farmers. So you have money and you map them out and you find them and you mobilize them, and then you pay for the training venues and the logistics, and then you have 2,000 farmers trained. That's an output. That's a short-term result. Now, you then move to medium term, and medium term is, what were you training the farmers for? We were training the farmers to, for example, improve on the farming practices, adopt new farming practices, those kinds of things, use new seeds, use new improved seeds, store their produce differently, and that's outcome. So you realize that the game has now changed. So you have less control on whether the farmers will go to the market and buy the seeds, whether the farmers will actually store them differently. So that's become their bit, and that's an outcome. However, you still put some investments in trying to encourage them to use the seeds. Are they using the seeds? You're monitoring to see whether they're using the seeds. You're learning on those who are not using, why they're not using, but that's an outcome. And then impact is, what was the long-term vision you had? It was the vision to then improve on farm productivity, farm yields. Was the vision to increase on income at the household level by these farmers, and because of that income increase, therefore improve on their livelihoods. So that will happen much later, when people have gone through seasons and harvested and either sold to the market, and now they have money, and then you track what they use the money for. Did they pay school fees for children? Did they pay for health services? What did they use the money? So you begin to track what that income was, what that impact was. Now that's in the long term, and that's far removed, because again, even though you can influence people to use different kinds of seeds and plant in a different way and harvest and store in a different way, and even take stuff to the market to sell, you may not have control or influence on how and what they use the money on.
Absolutely.
So whether using the money to take someone to hospital will actually translate into improved health of the person, and whether families will have improved and better livelihoods because of your intervention. Then you begin to realize really that the game changes, so that even though you had control at output level, you have less control at outcome level and moving forward to impact level. What you then realize is that then you rely on partnerships. You rely on partnerships to enable for the outcome to be realized. You must build partnerships with the farmers so that they understand where you're coming from, so that they own the problem, and then they move it to the outcomes of the training. What were they being trained on? Did they own the training? Did they want the training? That kind of thing. So it is the partnerships you build that will deliver on the outcomes. However, moving on to impact is not a straight line. So whether farmers sell and they have money, and now they go to the hospital, improvement in their health well-being is not just a factor of having money and going to the hospital. There are many other factors, with other contributors. So that impact is a contribution. It is not for one intervention to cause. Interventions merely contribute to the achievement of impact, and when you speak to impact, you must be alive to, you are just contributing towards making it happen, but you didn't cause it. Other people did their bits, and if they didn't do their bits, if the health workers did not do their bits, are not there to treat. If the government did not provide medicine and facilities, and there would not have been positive health outcomes, even though the farmer had money to pay for it. And that's how impact is then looked at. So, in a nutshell, the difference between outputs, outcomes, and impact is outputs are short-term results. We have control over them. Outcomes are medium-term. We rely on others to deliver them in partnerships. Impact are long-term. It is a contribution by many other actors and many other factors.
So what I am getting from this is, for you to create any form of result, number one, there are resources that you need: time,
Yes.
money, people, partners, and an environment that is conducive for you to achieve that result. It could
Absolutely.
be that in some cases, some organizations have everything else except that the environment is not conducive, such as the time we are right now with COVID-19 pandemic, where some organizations have to down their tools because we are social distancing, people are working from home, and if you're working with farmers, in our example, you cannot go and meet them and train them. So in that case, the result that is expected in the short term, for example, training cannot happen, and maybe they have to look for other ways, and that is a conversation for another day on how to change your strategy. I actually interviewed someone yesterday, and we will be sharing that that recording for that episode on how to change your strategy. But now back to our point.
Absolutely.
We know what outputs are. We now know what our outcomes are, and we now know what our impact is. So one of the things that some of the NGO Whisperer clients have been asking me, and also we've been discussing, is how can they measure the impact of their work without breaking the bank? Because there are different ways of measuring impact. Some of them are very expensive, they are costly, they are the gold standard. You talk about randomized controlled trials and so on and so forth. Very expensive, needs highly qualified people such as you, because I know you have done many of those. I was also involved in some of the ones that we did earlier with the behavior change programs in Kenya, Kenyan universities specifically. So how can nonprofits really measure their impact in the long term, which are long-term results, without breaking the bank?
Measuring impact does not have to be expensive in any way whatsoever. I think it gets expensive depending on who's calling the agenda. As one of the scholars earlier had said, who's counting results and whose results count. And sometimes we confuse those two in terms of who is counting and whose results count. Now, impact measurement can be as simple when organizations or implementers get intentional from the start. When they get intentional from the start is they map out clearly what is your trajectory of change? How do you want to move from the problem to the impact? And have you clearly mapped out that path? If you have clearly mapped out the path and you have clear results change and you begin on that path, you go back to one of the articles I shared earlier on resource basket, that impact is really an aggregate.
By saying the article you had shared earlier, you refer to the article in the NGO Whisperer magazine, right?
Yes.
Wonderful.
On the resource basket. Mm-hmm. And basically, what it was trying to outline is that results and changes that we want to see happen almost every day. They happen every day. And if we are not documenting them and keeping them and interacting with them and interrogating them and reflecting upon them, 3 years down the line, we want to look for impact. But impact passed. Impact did happen. Somebody's life changed. Somebody's income improved. Somebody managed to pay for school fees where they were not able to pay before. Somebody managed to take their sick person to hospital. Somebody managed to build a better house. People were able to now start eating 3 meals a day, which were not eating before the intervention. But those were happening as the intervention was being implemented. But you are not alive to them because sometimes we over-focus on projectization of implementation. Run with the activities, and we're not stopping to ask, is something changing? What is changing? Where is it changing? For whom is it changing? And those ones happen when we are intentional about monitoring our resource chains and documenting assumptions and seeing how assumptions are changing and learning and improving, and asking questions and interacting. Sometimes we simply just don't interact. And without interacting, people don't tell you what's happening. People don't tell you what's changing. People see you come, people see you go. People see you come, people see you go. And because of that, we wait until the end of the project to then invite evaluators like myself to come and tell us whether there has been changes in the intervention. Now, we come with all manner of complex tools, as you mentioned, control groups, randomized control trials, all manner of research, population-based research, with complex tools. We're going out there asking people all sorts of relevant questions, in terms of trying to get them to remember when the project started, what has changed, what has not changed. Over time, community people have mastered the game of these kinds of impact evaluators. When they see you, when you call them to a meeting, they know you're going to provide some stipend for lunch and transport, and therefore they will tell you what they think you want to hear, and all of a sudden, they are all remembering things that happened 5 years ago, now things were, and that kind of thing, but how are you able to recall all this stuff? And it wasn't recorded anywhere. Mm-hmm. But because those community members have learned to adjust, that evaluators come once in a while in big cars, purporting to sit under a tree, but really nobody ever goes back with the community with what the impact was. Nobody engaged community actively throughout the life of the project in terms of what was changing, who was changing, why were they changing, what was making them to change, what were the benefits of the change, and all that, and getting them to own it as their own project. Most of these projects have been NGO and CBO projects and not community projects. Community have been classified as the beneficiaries, and because of that, they formed that aspect of we are just beneficiaries. They see us, when they see us, when they call us to a meeting, we ask for what's the provision for lunch and transport? Why are you guys giving $100? Those guys give $300, and these guys give $200, that kind of thing. How long are you going to keep us there? We have other things to do. So it's become something that is not what it is, when it really can be so affordable as part of the everyday implementation. When we do impact monitoring is we keep the impact on the bullseye, and we know that what the intention of this project was to improve on the livelihoods of these poor people in 1, 2, 3, 4 ways.
So just to take you back,
yes,
the barriers to effective impact evaluation is, number one, from what I got from you, is lack of intentionality on measuring what happened and what did not happen. And then also you mentioned the fact that we need to involve the community throughout, and most of the programs that you have seen in your experience where they failed or have not properly measured impact is when they wait for the exercise to be conducted at the end of the project, and it's not an ongoing exercise, meaning monitoring and evaluation is not integrated into project implementation.
Absolutely. Even though people call it monitoring and evaluation, what most organizations do is monitoring, because they don't do evaluation on an ongoing basis.
Yes.
They undertake project monitoring, but they say, oh, we're doing M&E. Because evaluation is intentional, is trying to find out what's changing and why, what's not changing and why, what's making things to change, for whom is it changing, who is seeing the change, who's benefiting from that change. And it's a very intentional process, really, as opposed to...
So how can organizations be intentional? What are the few steps, to start off the process to make sure that evaluation, as we always say, M&E, monitoring and evaluation, is part of program implementation? However, as you have said, most organizations do project monitoring, but they do not evaluate. Now, project evaluation or monitoring impact on an ongoing basis needs to be intentional. How can organizations that are not monitoring impact right now, how can they begin? What are the steps to take to integrate this into their project implementation processes?
First is to have some basic ownership of the process. So it's very important that an NGO or a CBO begins to own their resource chain. By owning the resource chain is develop it yourselves. Sit together and ask, why are we in this space? Why are we in this intervention? What do we want to see changing? In whom? How will it happen? What partnerships will we build? Whom will we work with? How will we rally support together? And that is not a one person or a few managers sitting in a corner and doing it. It's everybody involved in that intervention, sitting together. Number two, then you take it to the target group. When you say, how can we now build a partnership with the target group so that we co-own this thing, we co-create it now. If a problem is a problem of access to water for people who are living in water scarce conditions, the solution is not to take to them water solutions. Say, we're going to drill boreholes for you. Is to sit with them and ask, how best can this situation be addressed? How do you see it being addressed? What partnerships do you think are critical? What resources do you have? What don't you have? How can we then come together? Right from there, you have built a partnership for ownership from the ground. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens ordinarily is that a lot of the NGOs and the CBOs do not have control on these interventions because these interventions are donor funded. And because of that, donors have also imposed their own log frames or the kind of results that they want to see and they want measured. And they have also imposed budget limits. Or you can only spend this much for your monitoring and evaluation. You can only have 2 or 3 staff whom you're calling the M&E staff and officers and that kind of thing. And that already throws people off balance because therefore ownership has been removed from you, control has been removed from you, and somebody else tells you what indicators you're going to monitor. They don't like the indicators you came up with. They are trying to suggest for you, and they send you consultants to help you think through the indicators that are suitable for their own reporting. What you end up finding yourself in is you're caught up. You're caught up in collecting information that your donor wants and sending them to your donor and sticking to these timelines. If they say, we want quarterly reports on these indicators in this format, that's what you end up finding yourself doing. So you lose touch with the why of your intervention, interrogating the change, putting in place systems, tools for interrogating, celebrating that change, because more often than not, your funder is not interested in that, in all that, and they tell you, we can't give you resources to go and collect information that we're not interested in. So you just collect indicators 1, 2, 3. The rest, we don't know what we don't need them, so you don't have to collect them, and all that. And then the game is lost. Now, the question goes back to, can local organizations have sufficient resources to put in place their own measures of collecting sufficient information on their intervention? It's a big question because the funding terrain shifted from core funding to project funding. Yeah. Core funding was where organizations were receiving funds to implement their dream, implement the solutions that they wanted. That was core funding. But project funding came when donors give you a particular project within a particular period of time and only sufficient funds for that particular project. And therefore, you don't have funds to do any other thing. And they've made the financial reporting too strict. If they see any activity that is not within what they approved, it will be called disallowed expenditure, is not allowed within the financial reporting, and therefore you can't undertake it.
So thank you so much for walking us through what an organization can do to be able to position themselves to collect data. We've looked through the challenges that organizations face. Most of it is because of restrictions And some of it also comes from lack of ownership and initiative from the organizations themselves. And while we know that donors impose restrictions because they are funding a specific project, they want to see a specific result, I also believe, and I've worked with organizations who have taken the initiative to create a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation system that has a list of expected results, but also open to unexpected, or what we call unintended results. One example I remember was when we were working in Kenya together on the HIV prevention program. And I remember, because of the program, we were expecting that there's going to be less condom use through the condom distribution activity. But after actually training the university students on abstinence, being faithful, and condom use, back in the day, that was what was recommended as HIV prevention programs for young people. It ended up that we had an intended result of high condom usage, and more students actually came up front and said they are now using condoms or having more sexual encounters more than they did before the program. That was an intended result. We did not expect it. We thought they would abstain more. So tell us, how can organizations prepare themselves and set up these indicators so that they can collect what the donors want, but also collect information that will help them to gauge their impact and measure it effectively?
Thank you, Caroline. And that's really a good question. In terms of how organizations can set up systems to collect both intended and unintended, one is by beginning to understand those two, intended and unintended. Intended is what you planned out in your resource chain, in your trajectory of change. You had mapped out that we will move from these activities to these outputs, to these outcomes, and then to this impact. So that's intended. Unintended is what you had not foreseen or thought about, but somehow will happen in the life of the implementation of the project. Now, how do you then collect those? Is by having the resource basket. And the resource basket really is when you go out to first look for the intended, which we trained these people with this expectation of behavior change. So we're asking them, how are you behaving now, for us to be able to say that the intended behavior change has taken place or not. However, organizations can be creative and intentional to also engage in other conversations. One is by simply asking people, so how are things now? What's happening? In that conversation, they will give you a lot of the unintended things that are already happening that you hadn't thought would happen, changes that are taking place that you hadn't foreseen would take place, or weren't influenced by your project, or are indirectly influenced by your project, by simply teasing out a conversation with different actors at different levels. Those conversations have to be objective, not subjective. Subjective is when you have a particular answer you're looking for. But objective is where you simply ask the question and then you allow for the respondents to be open enough to tell you what actually is happening and what their perspective of why it's happening the way it's happening. That way, when you go back to analyze that information, you then identify the unintended changes that took place. We set out to train them to use condom or to abstain, or be faithful. We realized there are certain assumptions we hadn't quite monitored, in terms of factors that influence behavior change or factors that influence behavior among young people, or there were certain trends that were happening that were, in a different direction that we hadn't thought about before. So sometimes the unintended changes are learning points. They're learning points for you to begin to see that you either made certain assumptions that were untrue, or they are in the process of delivering that change. There are many other factors and many other actors whom you hadn't mapped out earlier, and who had different intentions, interests, and influences in causing change to happen, and that they just took things in a different direction. That's how you get to see the unintended. But these ones happen if organizations adopt the idea of a results basket, that the small little conversations that you have with various actors as you go about the implementation aggregate into the bigger changes that you could be looking for, or the unintended changes. But if you miss out on these conversations, on these nuances, then you don't get to pick even the intended. Sometimes we miss out the intended because we just asked the wrong question, and you ask the wrong question, or you just organize the meeting in the wrong way. It's like, the three questions that we always ask in this kind of work. Are we doing the right things? Are we doing them right? And are we making a difference? And sometimes the second question is a determinant. Are you doing it right? Did you mobilize them rightfully? Sometimes you want to get information from farmers on what's changing, but you took the farmers to a hotel, and they sat there, they've been there for a whole week. You try to ask them what's happening, what's changing in farming practices, in a hotel. You realize that when you take them to the farm and you're in the farm, then they are so excited. They say, well, come and see my crops. My crops are changing. I pruned them like this. I did this top dressing like this. Or I tried to mix this top dressing fertilizer with this kind of pesticide. This one didn't work, this one worked. So you get much more richer information by doing it right, as opposed to if you did not do it right,
So what I'm getting from you right now is, what are we doing right? Are we doing the right things? And
yes.
As you said, are we doing the right things is the question that helps us to really know how effective our monitoring and evaluation of the project is. And then once we know how to do things right and to do the right things, then we are able to gauge the impact. Now, my question is,
yes,
how do you know which questions to ask? Now, you mentioned that taking the farmers, for example, to a hotel, and of course, most people would want to do that, thinking you're taking them away, they'll be more objective because they will be able to have time to think. But on the contrary, what I'm getting from you is conduct your monitoring or impact monitoring in the environment that it happened. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Getting to the right questions and the right results and outcomes is context specific. Mm-hmm. It's context specific. It requires you to apply basic emotional intelligence, basic social intelligence in understanding who exactly are you asking the question to, what is their context, and what would distort that context and give you the wrong response. So if it's a farmer, mm-hmm. Again, using the example of farmers, if you remove a farmer from their farm, what you have done is you have also caused a distraction, because then in the hotel they're thinking, okay, so what's happening back in the farm? Did they untie the goat? Did they do this kind of thing? Is it going to rain? This kind of. So, but if you're in the farm, they feel a level of comfort that you have come to them, you respect them and what they do, you appreciate the farm, and therefore you're willing to see, you're willing to see what it is that they're doing, the challenges they're facing, sometimes even the challenge of getting to the farm, because sometimes when you talk to farmers and you've taken them away, they sit there and they wonder, this guy has no clue that I had to travel through mud road, 100 kilometers to get here.
Yeah.
So he thinks, oh, we just get seeds, go buy seeds, we just get seeds. But when you go to the farm, they begin to see that you actually understand the context within which they farm. And if you talk about access to seeds, that you have seen how many agro dealers they have, how far dispersed are they, you probably have understood the cost of seed in those areas, what it would take a farmer to move from their farm to get the seed and back. So being context sensitive enables you to ask the right questions, within that particular context and get the right answers within that particular context. Yeah, if you skew it, then people give you answers that they imagine you want to hear, but they have nothing on truth. At the back of their heads, they're wondering how you are so removed from reality. So sometimes when we talk to farmers, when you remove them from their context and bring them out to a centralized place like a hotel, what goes on in their mind is they imagine, or they think that you imagine that their situations are so homogeneous. We have the same. You think we have the same kind of soil, we have the same rainfall pattern, we have the same infrastructure in terms of roads. We have the same market facilities as all farmers and that kind of thing. And because of that lack of context awareness, you end up talking to farmers for months, for weeks in a hotel, and they get nothing. Because as you're busy talking, they're busy interrogating your lack of understanding of context and how you think things just happen in a straight line. So that's why a lot of organizations that deal with farmers in this part of the world have changed, and now they're adopting more of demo plots, identifying champion farmers, using those champion farmers and their farms as the demo plots to then demonstrate good agricultural practices, working with local agro dealers in terms of village-based extension services, using infrastructure that is context specific to then relay the information you want to the target group in a manner that they own it, they understand it, it makes sense to them, and it can work for them. Wonderful. And that's what local organizations need to adopt, to be able to work with impact.
Wonderful, wonderful. So to measure impact, one needs to first understand the right questions to ask the questions in the right manner, in the right context. And what I got from you is the right context is to make sure that you have a sense of emotional intelligence to understand these farmers. Go to the communities. In this case, our example is for farmers, but depending on what your project is, go to where your beneficiaries are, conduct site visits, and during those site visits, collect your data and ask the right questions and ask them right, and also create an ambience where people can show you, not tell, show you what they are doing and you can observe it. So there are different ways of collecting data, and I have seen through our conversation that there are different tools that may be used. Some of it are qualitative, some of it are quantitative. Could you walk us through tools and examples of whether they are qualitative, quantitative, and also if you could define those terms to us? It's a new term that I'm bringing into the conversation, but I would like you to share with us how best can people use the different tools that they have.
Thank you, Caroline. The discussion around quantitative and qualitative is age-old. Especially in research or data collection or any other types of information collection. But really, what defines quantitative and qualitative depends on the magnitude of the information you want to collect, and of course the objective of why you want to collect that information. So that if you want to collect a lot of population-based data, you have to then be driven by certain objectivity, and then you design quantitative tools that you can use to go and collect that information. In those quantitative tools, mostly you have already predetermined certain clusters of responses. And so you simply want the respondents to either question one, tick one, or A or B or C, because you already have, some certain hypotheses. So you're working with a hypothesis, and you're like, this could either go this way. I'm going to ask you question one. You can respond in happy or not happy, sad or not sad, that kind of thing. And then I just tick one, or you respond yes and or no, or not applicable, or I know, I don't know, that kind of thing. So you have already predefined the responses, and you're looking at a quick method of analysis in certain population-based numbers based on a sample. And then you want to make inferences from that to a larger population, based on, again, on the sample. So you can sample, you want to collect information that relates to 4.5 million smallholder farmers. You develop a sampling frame, you go out there, you collect information around 4,500 farmers with a representative sample of the different farmer cohorts, smallholder farmer cohorts, and then you come and analyze, and then you can use that to inference, as an inference, in terms of, therefore, these are the way or behavior trends or purchasing patterns of 4.5 million farmers based on that sample. Now, in terms of qualitative sometimes is also used alongside quantitative to delve deeper into some of the questions that do not come with a yes or no response. So you are seeking people's opinions. You're seeking people's opinions, or you're seeking their personal perspective on a particular issue, or sometimes on the issue that you put to the quantitative people, and or some of the gray areas. So if you do, for example, a quantitative survey and you analyze your data, and some areas they're not adding up, they're not adding up. So you want to then go and interrogate further. So you organize for qualitative, which means interviews. And interviews could be one-on-one interview, or could be focus group discussions. You select people. Again, you have to work with a proper sample that is representative. So if it is women, it is young women. If it is older women, it is older women. If it is young men, it is young men, older men, older men. If it is youth, it is youth. So you define the cohort, and then you build a representative sample of the cohort, and then you ask them the questions in more of an interview manner, to seek their personal opinion on why the things are the way they are. Sometimes you also do sampling based on key informants. For example, people who, by virtue of what they do, they sit in a position where they would know more about that particular topic. Either because
the example of farmers, for example, let's say you are conducting a qualitative survey, or you're collecting qualitative data for farmers. So you have visited them in the farm. As we said, we go to the farm, not to the hotel. We go to the farms where they are, and we have a group of women farmers, or men farmers, or young people who are involved in farming or supporting their parents. So we have all these groups. And now you are asking them questions. Now, you've moved from there, and now you are looking for a key informant, someone who, as you said, is in a position to talk about that project, but is not the farmer, it's not the woman, it's not the man, it's not the son of the farmer or the daughter of the farm. It's probably the local chief, or the local community leaders. So how do you choose who to interview as your key informant?
So ordinarily, based on the sector, it's easy to then do a quick course and just find out who are the leaders in those sector, right from the community level to the government. So, for example, there's a ministry, there are ministry structures all the way to the grassroots. There's extension officers. The extension officers, if you call one of them, will tell you in this particular area. There's a lead farmer, whom in most cases called a champion farmer. There's a local chief who works with farmers and holds farmer meetings frequently. So depending on the sector, it's not difficult to draw up a list of who would be a key informant in the information you're looking for in that particular sector. It begins by talking to one leader, and then they'll lead you to a couple of others based on the structure. Or you simply walk into an office and ask, if I were to get this information from this county and this sub-county, what are the available structures that I can work with? And people will tell you, as far as government is concerned, these are the structures that you can then work with. And as far as ministry is concerned, these are the structures. And as far as the sector or the NGOs are concerned, this is the NGO chairperson of the NGO committee of that area is this person. And as far this is the chairperson of the local market. And so it's always, you begin from somewhere, and as you ask about the structures, you get people get to volunteer a lot of information on who then is critical. Now, based on that, then you go back and redraw your list of key informants. Not everybody who is provided as a leader could be a key informant for you, depending on what you're looking for. So you go back and then you redraw the list and say, I may not want to talk to the chief because I'm not looking for security-related factors, but I may want to talk to the chairman of the local market or chairman of the local farmers cooperative. That it would give me more info in terms of access to seeds, what are the fluctuating prices of seeds, where are farmers getting seeds, and that kind of thing. Or if you want to know, whether issues of access to market or issues of say extension services, then you may want to find the local extension officer and say, look, what are the challenges with extension, or the local agro dealer, and the agro dealer will tell you when farmers come to the shop, these are the kind of questions they're asking. From here, I can be able to tell that they have challenges in finding the right seeds or mixing the right seed with the right fertilizer. So sometimes you have to relook and reanalyze the long list you receive of potential key informants, and then redraw it based on the objective of what you're looking for.
Wonderful, wonderful. So now that we have moved away from addressing the challenges, now we know what impact is. We know what our outcomes are. We know what the outputs are: short-term, medium-term, long-term results, in that order. And yes, we know how the barriers, and we have taken away the barriers. We now are collecting, we want to collect data on a regular basis because we don't want the impact to happen or the outcomes to happen and fail to collect that data. And as you recommended, using a results basket where you are asking questions, what was intended, and then again asking what was not intended and has happened from the beneficiaries as well as from key informants in the community. My question is, this all seems great. However, time, energy, resources is required to do this. How often would you recommend an organization conduct these site visits, as we call them, or engage in consultations, visit and interview community members? How often do you think would be necessary so we don't miss out on impact as it's happening?
Good question, good question. Depending again on the size of the intervention that a company or an NGO is undertaking, determines the frequency within which you can then visit. For example, people who work in household-based interventions that improve livelihoods, the frequency is higher because then, you know, you want to engage with them in the challenges they face, you know, almost on a daily basis. But you could plan every 2 weeks or monthly on the minimum visits and conversations, because contexts change, things happen, markets prices are shifting up and about. So the more you stay close to the pulse of what's happening with the households and the farmers, the better. Because sometimes also in terms of those who engage with farmers, the season patterns are shorter. From the time they till the farm to the plants to the harvest is something around 4 months. So if you're not within that space, then you realize that, you know, with some 2 weeks when you did show up, there was a fluctuation in seed prices. Therefore, they didn't buy the seeds, and therefore they have the wrong seeds in in the farm. Or there was a problem with access to fertilizer because there was a delay in distribution because some consignment wasn't cleared on time at the port, and therefore no one was helping with these conversations. Because sometimes when farmers expect that in those kinds of visits, you help unlock barriers so that if they say we have 2 weeks or 3 weeks to planting, but there's no fertilizer in the market, then you go and find out from agro dealers, why isn't there fertilizer in the market? Or fertilizer hasn't come from fertilizer companies. Then you find the fertilizer companies, why is there fertilizer? You know, there's a blockage at the port.
Mm-hmm.
There's a slow speed of clearing. Then you go find government people and say farmers are going to miss out on the planting season because of these new regulations at the port. Can we do something to at least allow for fertilizer to be processed quickly? That way, you keep the pulse on what's going on with the farmers, and then you unlock the barriers to keep things moving. However, there are certain interventions that you don't need to be there frequently. For example, in market-based interventions, in market systems development, where you work through other market actors, and really, before you see a systemic change, can take a couple of months. So they wouldn't want you around their shops every month or so, because they're like, my friend, my stock is still my stock, is the way it was last month, nothing much has changed. So systemic change may take a bit of time. So you may want to factor in 3 quarterly visits to understand what's going on, you know, or maybe, but mostly around quarterly visits is suitable with a clear agenda. Sometimes what people do is this monitoring visits become routine and boring, and, you know, nothing new and nothing interactive. So before you undertake this, be clear on what is it why are you not taking the visit? What do you want to achieve? What are you able to unlock? So that when you go to farmers and they tell you there's a delay in fertilizer coming to the market, you can do something about it and not just listen to them and go away and come back next month without doing anything. Because otherwise, then they get bored of the routine, and the next time they won't create time for you. Because so like, you come here, you get me off the farm, have my 2 or 3 hours of conversation, I tell you stuff that's going on, you disappear, you show back next month with other random questions that have no connection with my farm.
So the most important thing is obviously to gauge and see how often would be meaningful. In some cases, it would be visiting them more and then slowing down in certain instances. But then again, what I'm getting from you is it's also important to have that feedback loop. Once you have visited them, to share with them what you found out. And I think that is where most organizations also fail to give feedback. So as we wind down this meeting, we would like to tell you when we are going to send you the report, or when we will call you, or when we will send our WhatsApps. That is something that might help to create that sense of expectation, and also to create a sense of ownership, because they've given you information and now you're telling them, I'm going back, I will send you a text message to tell you what we found out from not just you, but many other farmers. So that
Absolutely.
feedback loop, I believe, is one of the most important things to measure impact and to
Absolutely.
let people know this is what is changing. Perhaps you need to speak with this person, or perhaps this needs to happen. Now, as we close down our interview, and people might be wondering, where can we get resources about the outcome basket or the results basket? How can we find or read or access information about all these amazing things? Where can we find this information?
There's a lot of information. The M&E community has grown over the years, especially in the last 2 decades. So a lot of communities have been formed that have a lot of resources that practitioners and interested people can go and find and access, and most of them, if not all, are free. So, for example, people who work in development programs can go to the IPDET site. IPDET is the international program for International Development Program Evaluation, where they can find it's on the evalpartners.org. I'll share with you an email on that. If people are interested in resource basket and outcomes harvesting, they can visit the Outcome Learning Community. Again, is outcomemapping.ca, and they get a lot of information and a lot of materials there on how to map and get this information. People who are in market systems and enterprise development, there's a whole network called the Donor Committee on Enterprise Development. Again, the information and materials there are free for downloading and using by everyone in that space. It's over 150 projects have used the DCD standards in over 50 countries. We also have the network run by Professor Rick Davis from the UK. It's called the M&E News. You can access it on m&e.co.uk. You also have some of them, like the network for, it's called the Eval SDG network, which is basically a network of how to properly evaluate the SDGs. Again, they have their own website. I'll send that on your email, in which they can be accessed. There's numerous others, and a lot of this information is for free for practitioners. In fact, it can be overwhelming. If people are going to go in there, please know what you're looking for, because otherwise you get lost in the sea in terms of where do I start? I want all of it. I just want to download it and use it. But you must be careful on what are you looking for when you go into those sites, and be specific. Go in there. Other than materials, they are communities of practice. So you can meet with people, meet with different kinds of practitioners, interact with them. You find mentors in there. You find people who can share with you their experiences, can send you case studies on what's working, what's not working, what they have tried out, different tools that you can use. Whether you're a practitioner, whether you're just someone running an organization and is interested in getting involved in understanding how impact comes about and how best you can institute processes in your organization to monitor impact, document it, celebrate it, and report on it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you
Most
so
welcome.
much. Really, we really appreciate the wisdom, insight, and what you have shared with us on how organizations can effectively evaluate their impact without breaking the bank. Indeed, the results basket and outcomes harvesting has been something that we at the NGO Whisperer have been implementing with some of our clients, and we are beginning to see results. To learn more about this and more, we will share resources and we will share links, and you can also go to the NGO Whisperer magazine, and Charles is a regular contributor on our program management column, and he writes about this, including what we have talked about today: results, basket, and outcome harvesting. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this show, we invite you to subscribe to the NGO Whisperer channel on YouTube. And there you will find all these resources that we have been talking about, whether it's the links to the results, basket, and outcome harvesting, and many others. As part of that, we've also put together a database of all the possible different sectors, as well as practitioners that we are engaging with in monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning, one of whom is Charles Warria. We will provide you with their links, and you can reach out to them for support. Until then, remember, it's all about connecting people, raising funds, and impacting lives globally.